Good morning, and welcome to the Boulder Valley Unitarian Universalist Fellowship. I'm Haley Anderson, and I'm joined today by my fellow service associate, Paul Gibb, and our tech ushers, Dave Leonard, Don Price, and Mary Stackpole, who help things run smoothly. As I say our welcome today, I invite you to shift into gallery view, if you haven't already done so, and scroll through the screens so you can experience the lovely diversity of all those who have guided us through our history and are building the future of our congregation. Tuning in from a variety of locations and adding up to a fellowship that means a lot to us, especially in these troubled times. You are all welcome here today. And the beauty of languages, cultures, skin tones, shapes, and sizes that come together in your uniqueness. You are welcome here. And all the ways you experience and express gender, you are welcome here. And all the ways you make your living and the places you are from, you are welcome here. Christian, pagan, humanist, Jew, Buddhist, mystic, Muslim, Unitarian, Universalist, with all the traditions that inform your spiritual life, you are welcome here today. No matter how long you are away, nor how soon you will return, you are welcome here. Whether you come with laughter in your hearts or tears, you are welcome here. You are invited to join us with an open mind, a loving heart, and willing hands. We welcome you today. If you're new here, we're glad you're here and hope that even on Zoom, you can still experience some of the warmth and love of this fellowship. Each Sunday is different here, so please come back a few times to really get to know us. Please see the chat window for the link to our first-time visitors page. That page has a link to our visitor info form, which invites you to tell us about yourself and request info about our activities. Or email your contact info to our office manager, Carol at officemanager@bvuuf.org. Carol's address is in the chat window as well. And check out our fellowship calendar and Connections Weekly, which lists many opportunities to stay connected. We've got one announcement today. If you are willing and able, please come to the fellowship parking lot from 12:30 to 1:30 this afternoon to sign the Fair Tax Colorado ballot measure petitions. A notary will be available for those who want to turn in their petition. The address and a link to more info on the Fair Tax ballot measure will be in the chat. Following our service, you have the option to stay in this Zoom room for our coffee hour or join the School of the Spirit coffee hour, the link for which Dave is putting in the chat window now and will again at the end of the service. Finally, if you're new to us, we invite you to introduce yourself in the chat. We love to know who is among us. If you have a chalice at home, you can light it with me as I light my chalice. So we know where all our chalices are, please write in the chat, chalice lit, and add the name of your town. Please say these words along with me as I light our chalice. We light this chalice with the warmth of love, the light of truth, and the energy of action. And now, I'll sing our bowl again, inviting it to draw you deeper into the present moment and this, our beloved community.
This is from a piece by Charles Magistro. It's not easy being a UU. I'm amused by the view that it's easy to be a Unitarian Universalist. It's as easy to be a Unitarian Universalist as it is to be persistent, courageous, and curious. It's as easy to be a Unitarian Universalist as it is to search the murky waters of life without sure charts to guide us or any guarantee that we will find a safe port to put down anchor. It's as easy to be a Unitarian Universalist as it is to overcome the natural fear of the unknown and venture forth with nothing to sustain us save our zest for living and hunger for new experience and knowledge. Our way in religion is not the way of ease. We are called to be sailors, for many worlds exist waiting to be discovered. And not the least of these worlds are within ourselves. It takes as much persistence, courage, and curiosity to look into our own depths, to come to terms with the twin mysteries of being alive and having to die, to see ourselves in new and larger ways without being dishonest about our limitations, as it does to sail thousands of miles into an unknown ocean in search of dry land. And now we will sing hymn number 85, Although This Life is But a Wraith. I'm going to give a very brief introduction to the history of Unitarianism. I wish I could also say a bit about Universalism, but that will have to wait for another time. The two religions started out in very different places, but ended up back in the 1960s as one faith. In a sense, one can say that what we now call Unitarian theology has been morphing away from traditional Christianity for almost 2,000 years. And that theology has mostly been on the radical fringe of Christianity. But many of those who first propositioned such a theology were burned at the stake. And for perhaps that reason, in each of those many centuries, the theology really only morphed just a little bit. As far as Unitarianism as an organized religion in this country, one could say that the ancestor religions from which modern Unitarianism later broke away came over to Plymouth, Mass. In 1620 on the Mayflower, and to Boston, Mass. In 1630 on 17 sailing ships. That is not to say that the practitioners of those ancestor religions would feel welcome in any UU church today. Many, if not all, of those Puritans believed such things as that God had caused a great many New England Native Americans to die from the plague in order to, quote, make way for the people of God, unquote. But around 1800, something called the Age of Reason made an appearance, and many of the old New England churches, including even the church founded by the Mayflower Pilgrims, became Unitarian to indicate their rejection of the Trinity. and so did the divinity school at Harvard College. Now, rejecting the concept of the Trinity was not quite the same as rejecting all of Christianity. In many Unitarian congregations, Jesus was still treated as a very wonderful teacher and prophet, and God was still mentioned in many of the sermons and hymns. But there were still differences of opinion between various Unitarian groups, even back in the early 1800s. Ralph Waldo Emerson, now claimed as one of Unitarianism's great heroes, was refused permission to address the Harvard Divinity School a second time after his first address to them proved too radical for many of them to swallow. When I tell my friends that I grew up Unitarian, they may too easily assume that the churches I grew up in were much like our UU fellowship here in Colorado. The truth is that the two churches I attended in the 1950s and 1960s would seem kind of Christianish to many UUs today. For instance, we all repeated the following statement of faith each Sunday. Quote, "We believe in the fatherhood of God, the brotherhood of man, the leadership of Jesus, salvation by character, and the progress of mankind onward and upward forever," unquote. That was probably a statement of faith left over from a few generations earlier, though, because the only way in which our ministers' sermons were all that Christian was in the frequent mention of Jesus. Not Jesus as the Son of God or the Savior, but Jesus as the great prophet and social justice radical that he really was, the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus. Those who believed that one of our ministers was gay did not make any kind of fuss. But to my chagrin, too many members of our particular congregation, although liberal, were not quite radical enough to join the late 1960s protests against racism and/or the Vietnam War. So I stopped being a Unitarian until I was in my 30s, when I rediscovered UUism, along with my wife Mary, in a small church in the Midwest. By incredible coincidence, however, I got to go back to one of my childhood churches in 2008, 50-something years after I left it, when my daughter Sarah and her husband John were ordained as the co-ministers there. Things were noticeably different. There was no mention of Jesus, there was a trans employee, and there was a much greater emphasis on social justice issues of all kinds. But there were still the same beautiful century-old stained glass windows showing scenes from the Bible, of course. So Unitarianism, and since the 1960s, UUism, has never had a static, unchanging theological or political mindset, but its overall progress has nearly always been, at least in the general direction, of becoming more radical and more inclusive, stepping forward, but almost always with one foot still stuck in the past. And even in the same church, the theological focus can be different from week to week, of course. So if you are new to UUism, as we say at the beginning of the service, do come back a few times. Now, please join me in singing a song that's brought Unitarian Universalism's comfort throughout the decades, and now again in this difficult time. It's number 146, "Soon the Day Will Arrive."
Soon the day will arrive when we will be together, and no longer will we live in fear. And the children will smile without wondering whether on that day thunder clouds will appear. Wait
This summer, we've been looking at our sources de-centered in a way that acknowledges the white Western privilege inherent in the way our sources are written and attempts to address the diversity of voices that have contributed to our faith. To truly understand the sources of our faith and the way our tradition has developed, it is necessary that we look into our history. Far more than just a history lesson, though, when we look into our past, we find the stories of our religious ancestors, the priests and prophets that have paved the way for the free religion we experience today. When you walk into a UU congregation, it is very easy to step into the life of that congregation as a singular unit without understanding the greater depth that lies at the heart of what it means to be a UU. This is intentional, in part, as UUs value their freedom so greatly that connection to other UUs or the Unitarian Universalist Association is not entirely necessary. But I believe we lose something when we lose connection to our history. In the year that I have been with this congregation, I have found myself hungry for an identity, hungry for the deeper meaning of what it is to be a Unitarian Universalist. I believe this identity goes far deeper than being a member of the fellowship. It lies with our religious ancestors who went about the work of building a liberal religion where God may be optional, but love and justice are not. In a great stroke of luck, 2 semesters into my Master's of Divinity program, I was able to take a course on UU history. Each week, I grew more convinced of my religious identity, and each week, I was reminded of all the work we still have left to do. As Paul mentioned, both Unitarians and Universalists were heretical Christian groups. As with any other Christian sect, UU history could easily be told through the lens of different white men squabbling over theological minutiae, but that wouldn't be the full story of our faith, nor would it be the most interesting. Though the fathers of our faith are many, and certainly worth hearing about, while we're decentering, I want to tell you a different story. I want to tell you about our mothers, the many women that have nurtured our faith into what it is today. These women, not always granted access to become our priest, became prophets. Not overly concerned with the semantics of theology, they gained an audience wherever one was available so that they might confront injustice and transform the world. Through them, we may claim ancestors and understand our identity. Many of these women you may have heard about, but didn't know was your religious ancestor. They were free thinkers, but in such a way that did not lead towards the esoteric individualism that we find in some of the men of our faith. These women were social justice activists, refusing to be bound and belittled by society. First, we have Dorothy Dix, born in 1802. She had a difficult childhood, and at the age of 14, she began running her own school. A few years later, she met one of Unitarianism's most influential pastors, William Channing. With his inspiration and guidance, she began teaching Sunday school at a women's jail and quickly became enraged by the conditions these women were suffering under. Like her own mother, many of these women were suffering from mental illness or were neurologically atypical and were left in unfit conditions as criminals. Dorothy exemplified our principles a century before they were written, as she traveled all around Massachusetts, challenging every sheriff to treat these women as people with dignity, and prepared a report for the Massachusetts legislature on the conditions under which the neuroatypical should be treated. Although, as a woman, she was not allowed to show the legislator her findings herself, a fellow Unitarian shared her report, and funding was secured for the expansion of the state hospital for the mentally ill in Worcester. Dorothy Dix affirmed and fought for the inherent worth and dignity of those whose society sought to dispose of. She is our mother. Another one of our Unitarian mothers is the author Frances Ellen Watkins Harper, one of the too few African American women remembered in our history. Born in 1825, Frances became a social justice activist on many fronts, including abolitionism, suffrage, and temperance, as well as in the Black literary, children's rights, and women's movements. When she was not writing or lecturing, she had a dual attendance at an AME church as well as a Unitarian church. One night, in a speech given at a women's rights convention in New York, she did what all mothers must sometimes do. She chastised us for forgetting our interconnectedness in a speech entitled, "We Are All Bound Up Together." She said, "We are all bound up together in one great bundle of humanity, and society cannot trample on the weakest and feeblest of its members without receiving the curse in its own soul." How timely these words are. She reminded us that when we seek power through the disadvantages of others, we all suffer. We all lose our humanity. She reminded the white women at this convention that while they were fighting for the right to vote, she and so many Black Americans that had gone to war on their behalf were fighting for their right to a seat on buses and trains. As mothers are sometimes known to reveal to their children their own selfishness, she is our mother as we remember these painful words. Quote, "While there exists this brutal element in society which tramples upon the feeble and treads down the weak, I tell you that if there is any class of people who need to be lifted out of their airy nothings and selfishness, it is the white women of America." May this rebuke by our mother chastise us and inspire us to remember the ways we are all bound up together in pain and in triumph. Our Universalist mothers were some of the first to become ordained ministers within any denomination, paving the way for the transformative female ministers we have today. These women, including Lydia Ann Jenkins, suffragist Olympia Brown, and Augusta Jane Chaplin, were inspired by the message of Jesus to uphold the full humanity and dignity of all, to be guided by the moral compass of Jesus' teachings, and let the dogma that divides us fall by the wayside. In 1901, Augusta Chaplin remarked, "The Church Universal, which is undying, belongs to all nations and to all times. Let the creeds remain as historic landmarks, but let the church the Master founded move on." While our fathers were busy trying to hammer out just the right doctrines, these women were at work in their churches and their communities. Julia Ward Howe, another Unitarian mother, was an early affirmer of what is now our sixth principle, the goal of world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all. She felt dearly the cost of war, and in 1870, she appealed to all women who have hearts. Whether your baptism be that of water or of tears, women of one country will be too tender of those of another country to allow our sons to be trained to injure theirs. Like Frances Harper, she understood the interconnection of humanity that goes so much deeper than religious or political ties. These women were inspired by no dry theology concerned with the promises of heaven. They fought for the justice that can be had in this life, saying that they shall forget theology in our living faith and our burning love. The 20th century saw the rise of even more inspiring women dedicated to the living faith, including Mary White Ovington, co-founder of the NAACP, and Emily Greenbaugh, who founded the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom. I don't have time to name all the women throughout the centuries that have played a role in the history of our country and our faith, but to honor just a few more and encourage you to learn of their legacy, I must mention Elizabeth Peabody, Clara Barton, Fannie Williams, and Mary Jordan, all women of intellect and integrity. But I don't tell you these names so that we can pat ourselves on our backs and sit assured of the good legacy of our religion. These women were not always met with the support of their ministers or denomination. The causes that they so righteously fought for were not universally upheld by those who called themselves Unitarian or Universalist. And some of these women valued their own rights above the rights of others. And in some cases, our mothers left to create other churches because theirs was not open enough. I tell you these names so that we can remember our identity. Far more important to our faith than the theological debates over the man-made religion that gave us our name are the testaments of character that gave us our principles. These women embodied our principles and nurtured our faith into being one of word and action. It is through these women, our mothers, that we are reminded of what being a part of the Unitarian Universalist family really means. It means we are a family of inclusion because we are bound together. That regardless of color, creed, sex, or gender, all have a seat at the table. Not only do we all have a seat at the table, but we all have a voice at the table. We are a family that understands that being a part of the interdependent web of all existence implies more than a spiritual connection. It means that the injustice that you experience is also mine. Wherever worth and dignity is taken from someone or something, we all feel its loss. We are also a family that celebrates innovation and progress, that fights the status quo whenever it is not in line with truth and justice. We are a family that desires peace over war and love over hate. So next time you are wondering what being a Unitarian Universalist looks like, I ask you to consider the mothers of our religious family. If you are here seeking a spiritual identity, I offer you these ancestors to help guide you into being. May they also guide this fellowship as we look into our future and remember our past. We have so many strong mothers here to remind us that we have a living faith and a burning love. May it be so. Now, please join me in singing about the burning fire of our faith and the fire of commitment, hymn number 1028.
From the height of days remembered, burnt the beacons bright and clear, guiding hands and hearts and spirits into faith set free from fear. When the bar of commitment sets our mind and souls
Each week, we remind ourselves of the abundance of our lives and this community by giving half of our plate away to those organizations that share our values. For the month of July, all of our half plates will be going towards urgent COVID-19 response to marginalized communities. This week, we share our plate with the Sister Carmen Center for COVID Relief as they help vulnerable renters keep their homes in our community. You may also use this time to answer this question in the chat. In one sentence, what does Unitarian Universalism mean to you? For the work of the fellowship and the work of the Sister Carmen Center for COVID Relief, we offer our gratitude and these gifts.
And now we sing.
From you I receive, to you I give. Together we share, and from this we live.
And now I invite us into our time of community connection, our time of sacred sharing. Don will remind you of how to let us know you'd like to share. When you do, whether by voice or by chat, please tell us your name, the pronouns you use, and where you live, and briefly let us know what's in your heart today. And now let's take a moment as we listen to the following song to honor any joy or concern still in the silent sanctuary of our hearts, knowing that we are bound together in this community and in the web of life.
Oh, I am waking up to find my world between the dying and being reborn. I see what is and I see what could be. Can't close my eyes again and go back to sleep. Fill my days with blessed unrest and my nights with dreams of justice. Make me a vessel for the turning of the tide. How can I change our course? Just a lonely voice. Wish I could lose myself in all the noise. But if we all would rise, a generation proud with a mighty song, we could turn this world around. So fill my days with blessed unrest and my nights with dreams of justice. Make me a vessel for the turning of the tide. Fill my days with blessed unrest and my nights with dreams of justice. Make me a vessel for the turning of the tide. Ancestors all behind, and before me every child. I bring the power of a long unbroken line. So when our time is through, I wanna know, did what we came to do for the future ones. So in our darkest days, may we all be strong and give our lives so life may go on. Fill my days with blessed unrest and my nights with dreams of justice. Make me a vessel. Fill my days with blessed unrest and my nights with dreams of justice. Make me a vessel for the turning of the tide. Fill my days with blessed unrest, and my nights with dreams of justice. Make me a vessel for the turning of the tide. Fill my days with blessed unrest, and my nights with dreams of justice. Make me a vessel for the turning of the tide.
I invite you to join me in saying our words to extinguish the chalice. We extinguish this chalice, but not the warmth of love, the light of truth, or the energy of action. These we carry in our hearts until we meet again. Now, may we go forth, bound up together in a blessed unrest.